Hi, hello everyone. Welcome in a little Saturday afternoon, Saturday early evening. Breaking news here. Adam Schefter, the first to report that Bryan McClendon, Georgia's wide receivers coach for the past two seasons, is off to the NFL. McClendon has taken a job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He will be teaming up with Liam Cohen, who was the offensive coordinator at Kentucky this past season. He will be working with Todd Bowles, whose son Troy is a freshman linebacker on the Georgia football team, or I guess a redshirt freshman linebacker there. But with McClendon moving on, he is the third on-field coaching change that Georgia has seen this offseason. Obviously, Fran Brown taking the Syracuse head coaching job, and Will Muschamp moving into an analyst role. Georgia went out. They hired Dante Williams from USC, big-time recruiter, a value add, a guy that opens up avenues to the West Coast. Travaris Robinson is now your safeties and co-DC coach. Excellent recruiter, obviously something that is a minimum when Georgia is searching for its next wide receivers coach, which it is doing now, as Bryan McClendon has moved on to become the wide receivers coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, this is going to lead to a lot of different reactions. You've already seen Anthony Evans tweeting out a heartbreak emoji online. I think that this is something that look, a lot of people are going to want to make this maybe into a bigger thing about what it says about the state of college football. That you have another, highly regarded coach moving on from college football into the NFL. We'll get into that here. Obviously, replacements. I think Kirby Smart probably going to want to move pretty quickly here, especially with the dead period ending in short order here. Obviously, Georgia's going to be on a spring break for that first week, but the spring visits are huge, and Georgia's going to need to have a quality wide receivers coach in there. As a wide receiver, as I've talked about, Jeff Santella has talked about the importance of that position in this class under Bryan McClendon the last two seasons after he stepped in for Cortez Hankton. You saw Georgia lean heavily on the transfer portal there last year, bringing in Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, both from SEC's programs. And then this year they go out, they had three wide receivers from that transfer portal: London Humphreys from Vanderbilt, Colby Young from Miami, and Michael Jackson III from USC there. Conversely, they signed three wide receivers in the 2023 recruiting class. One of them already gone in Yazid Haynes. He is now at Syracuse. And in this past cycle, you only sign Sokovia White and Nitro Tuggle there as well. It's going to be interesting going forward with whoever they end up hiring. I think you're going to want to see an emphasis on wide receiver recruiting. But I would point out here as well, I don't know how much of that is in or falls at the feet of McClendon, given that this has been an issue that predates McClendon back to the Cortez Hankton days, even back to the James Coley days under Kirby Smart. And you look at what McClendon was able to do in his time here, I thought developed Lad McConkey into a great player. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksain is also going to be a guy that gets drafted in this year's NFL draft. And you can see why a team like Tampa would go out and hire him. Obviously, a very good developer. Dylan Bell, I think you saw him make some good strides this year. Even Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett were contributors to Georgia in their first season with the program there. So it's going to be interesting. As far as McClendon moving on and people taking note of that, I think, this is McClendon's first NFL job. He is a college football lifer. Started out, obviously played at the University of Georgia, and then was a grad assistant starting in 2007, continued that for the 2008 season. Coached running backs, recruited the likes of Todd Gurley, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, a big-time recruiter, a guy that is Georgia through and through, and not just the wide receiver position for Georgia, but was also key with a number of Atlanta area prospects there as well. So I think with McClendon moving on, this is not something maybe Georgia fully anticipated, especially an alum, a guy that has been in this program before, you think would have pretty good job security, given where Georgia has won the past 2 years and what they have been able to do under McClendon. So the move comes obviously at an interesting time in the coaching change cycle. It's an NFL move. And so a lot of the big names have already been sorted out. It's interesting that at this point in the year that there is one. You saw last year around a similar time, obviously Todd Monken gets hired to be the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. And within minutes, Kirby Smart had named Mike Bobo as his replacement there. So I think that is certainly something to watch Georgia has not issued anything official in terms of McClendon leaving, but with Adam Schefter reporting this, you can feel pretty comfortable about what that news is. And we'll see going forward what a sort of timeline looks like in terms of getting a coach in. I know popular names have already been thrown out: Hines Ward, Terrence Edwards, names that always seem to come up when Georgia has a wide receiver coach opening. It was the same case 2 years ago when Cortez Hankton left to become the wide receivers coach at LSU. Ward this past year was the XFL. It was in the XFL as a head coach there. Is not currently with a team. And then Terrence Edwards, obviously a friend of ours here at DawgNation, was recently hired as the head coach, as I believe, Mount Vernon in the Atlanta area. So a lot of names to know and throw out there. We'll go ahead. We'll open it up to questions, comments you guys might have, thoughts on what you're doing out there. Yeah, Joe Hoff, I think this is a good point. Now, Lad was already an accomplished player, and certainly that, but I think you take notice of what he was able to do with Ladd McConkey in particular, and how Ladd continued to develop in his time at Georgia, how productive he was in the 2022 season. Even this year, we didn't get a chance to see Ladd at 100% for much of the year. You think back to the Missouri game, you think back to the Florida game, how good he was and how Ladd had developed as a route runner. I think McClendon there deserves some credit. Anthony on YouTube, look, this would be a home run swing of a home run swing. The Ohio State receivers coach you're referring to is Brian Hartline. It's important to note Brian Hartline is an Ohio State alum. He is still on staff, though he was demoted from offensive coordinator this past year. They obviously bring in Chip Kelly. Nobody recruits the wide receiver position better than Brian Hartline. I think there's a case to be made that he's the best position coach recruiter in the country when it comes to recruiting wide receivers. And I say that knowing Glenn Schumann recruits the inside linebacker position incredibly well. Trey Scott has done a really good job on the defensive line. Todd Hartley, obviously, at the tight ends position. But Brian Hartline is someone who can absolutely win wide receiver recruiting battles. And you're going to need to see Georgia do that more going forward. Obviously, look, they believe in a certain principle when it comes to NIL, and wide receiver is certainly a position there where NIL, I do think, is a big factor. And I think you've seen with the transfer portal as well, there's still a lot of unknowns when it comes to the transfer portal because, again, it's only 3-4 years old at this point. You've seen pretty consistently that you're going to be able to get quality wide receivers via the transfer portal. This isn't, position like offensive line or cornerback where I think those positions you're really going to need to lean on recruiting a lot more from the high school ranks. With Georgia, obviously, as Kirby Smart has said, they want to recruit primarily from the high school recruiting ranks. But, when it comes to it, if you're not able to land some of those guys, you can land contributors from the transfer portal at wide receiver. And you've seen, obviously, Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas come in and do that. And, you can note as well, Georgia has seen talented wide receivers exit via the portal. Jermaine Burton won at Alabama and A.D. Mitchell this past year. So certainly something there to watch going forward, whoever ends up getting hired as the wide receivers coach. That'll be big to watch. Barry Watkins, do I think Georgia loses any recruits over this? No, they don't have any current commitments in the 2024 class at the wide receiver position, or 2025 rather. I think big names to know, obviously Travis Smith out of Westlake High School there in the Atlanta area, CJ Wiley out of Milton High School there as well. Wiley and Travis Smith both working with Terrence Edwards there. I think, those guys are two of the more important recruits in this cycle. And whoever is Georgia's wide receivers coach, I think landing those two guys is going to go a long way in making that a smooth transition there. So we're going to obviously see what Georgia ends up doing here and who they end up hiring to be Bryan McClendon's replacement. It's an interesting move, to say the least, especially given the time of year and how close we are to the start of spring practice. It's only about 2-3 weeks away, as wild as that sounds, although Georgia has not officially announced a date there for that. So they're going to want to move quick to get this done before then. And look, wide receiver, I think one of the reasons that Georgia lost that game against Alabama was when Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey weren't 100%. Georgia's other wide receivers, I think, struggled to make an impact in that game. And that's not necessarily an indictment of Bryan McClendon, but I think Georgia needs more from its wide receivers going into the 2024 season. And so they're going to get to play with Carson Beck, who's one of, if not the best quarterback in the country coming back next year. And I think Beck is going to need to elevate the players in that wide receiver room. But whoever Georgia goes out and hires, Dylan Bell, I think, is a guy that can really blossom in this year. You saw him make some really big strides at the end of the 2024 or 2023 season, rather, especially at the wide receiver position, given early on in the year he had to play in that running back spot because of where Georgia was from a depth standpoint. Year two out of Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, I think those are guys maybe because they didn't explode in their first year as transfers. People might be a little bit lower on them. Let's not overlook the fact that, again, it's the second year in a Georgia offense. And while, yes, they're going to have a new position coach, Mike Bobo's still the OC, and they know what to expect. So to bring those guys back is significant. Anthony Evans, obviously the speedster from Texas. I think a lot of people are really interested in seeing what you get out of him this year. And then with the three transfers you brought in, Colby Young out of Miami, 6'5", really talented, can win those jump ball situations and be an effective red zone target. And Michael Jackson, the third out of USC. Those guys only have 1 year of eligibility remaining. They're not coming to Georgia to be further developed. They're coming in to play right away and play a big role for this Georgia team during the 2024 season. So obviously London Humphrey's a name to know as well, has some SEC experience with his time there at Vanderbilt. So I think it's an interesting position, and whoever steps in for it, this is certainly going to be a very interesting hire. You saw Georgia swing big in the other two on-field coaching hires that they made this year. You obviously bring Dante Williams from USC, has a ton of experience on the West Coast, an ace recruiter, and then you get Travaris Robinson to come over from Alabama, step in for Will Muschamp, a guy who has a ton of familiarity, obviously, with Will Muschamp, but also Kirby Smart knows him very well, respects him a lot. I think those are sort of the tools that you look for in terms of who they're going out to hire. Obviously, people are going to want to throw around Hines Ward's name there. I would caution with everyone wanting to throw out, yes, very good NFL receiver, obviously Georgia legend, played with Kirby Smart during their time together in Athens. Hines has not, in my opinion, shown the tools that he can go in and be an elite college wide receivers coach right now. And so I think that's maybe why I'm maybe skeptical that is who Kirby Smart would hire for that role. I think Terrence Edwards, well, again, he hasn't coached at the college level. He's worked with a lot of wide receivers, especially in the state of Georgia, and has, I think, a cachet there. So I think that is certainly something, the two names that are certainly most popular at this standpoint, something to watch moving forward. But before Dante Williams got hired, I don't think anybody was really throwing his name around out there as well. It'll be interesting to sort of see, again, familiarity was a big thing on this Georgia staff, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Mike Bobo had previously worked with Todd Hartley. He had previously worked with Stacey Searles, and then obviously with McClendon there as well. So I'll be interested in seeing who is brought in and sort of what their interaction is with Bobo and how important, past ties with Bobo is for this job. Del McGee, obviously, a day one Kirby Smart coaching hire and still with this team with the running backs. I know the Georgia State job opened up recently with the Sean Mitchell, maybe Sean Michaels, maybe leaving to become the tight ends coach at South Carolina. Sean Elliott, there we go. What you don't know is I spelled Sean like 3 different ways in my head before remembering his proper name. With him moving on, that's an interesting job to see how that opens up and whether, that's a school like that might be interested in Del McGee. And, Del's been at Georgia for a while. He's very well compensated, a very good running backs coach. See if he wants to go be a head coach. It's a Sun Belt level. It is a program that I think was due for a drop this year. And I think that's part of the reason Elliott ends up taking the South Carolina job. So certainly something to continue to watch there. But the big news, obviously, Bryan McClendon is being hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He will work with Liam Cohen, the former Kentucky offensive coordinator. We'll work with Todd Bowles, whose son Troy is a player on this Georgia team. It's not the first time Georgia has lost an assistant at this time of year. Obviously, in February last year, Todd Monken hired to be the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Georgia moved very quickly, like 15 minutes quickly, to bring in Mike Bobo and promote him from an analyst to an on-field coach and offensive coordinator for Georgia there. So you think Georgia's going to want to move quickly here. Spring practice starting less than a month. More importantly than that, the recruiting window opens up again. You have the dead period for the month of February, but Georgia, and especially with how important recruiting the wide receiver position is for the 2025 recruiting cycle, as it is every year, but specifically this year with what Georgia stands to lose, I think that is certainly something there to watch moving forward and how quickly they do want to move and get this new guy in there. So certainly something to watch there going forward. DawgNation here, we're going to keep you updated on it throughout the week as things develop. So obviously new coaching news to know, new coaching names to know. Obviously Bryan McClendon spent these past 2 years at Georgia, coming over, playing a key part in that 2022 national championship team, worked with guys, Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, Ladd McConkey, who are going to go on to be NFL wide receivers there. I'll be very interested in seeing how quickly Georgia goes about and finds his replacement. It's another coach leaving the college ranks to go to the NFL. This is McClendon's first NFL job, so I'm sure there will be a lot of long range takes on this. But DawgNation is going to keep you covered and updated on this. We'll have Mike Griffith on the beat this week. I'm sure talking about this. Brandon Adams is actually going on vacation, unfortunately, so may not have the freshest takes from BA on this, but we might do something on Monday potentially to sort of talk about it and reset it and see where things go from there. And then obviously Jeff Sintel Wednesday before the hedges, we'll have this covered from a recruiting angle and the impact that means there, as well as a ton of news and notes coming out of the Atlanta Under Armour camp, which is tomorrow. And then Kayleigh Mansell and myself will be back with you guys on Thursday, as we are every Thursday now moving forward. But that'll do it for us here on Saturday. Big news of the day. Georgia is looking for a new wide receivers coach, as Bryan McClendon is reportedly hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Adam Schefter of ESPN reporting that. We'll have a ton of more updates for you in terms of where things go from here from Georgia. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. This has been a DawgNation production.